NBA legend Bill Russell passed away today at the age of 88. For me, when someone that old passes away, I don't mourn the passing, but more so celebrate their life because I feel if you made it to that age, you were able to live a complete life in which you were probably able to do everything you wanted to do. Granted, some people who've lived that long don't, but most people get to experience pretty much just about everything they want to experience. So I think we should celebrate the life he lived. I have to say, before I touch into the life he lived, my earliest memories of Bill Russell as a kid was during the 90s, since that was the decade I grew up in. So when I first saw Bill Russell, he was always an old man to me. He was always an old grandpa figure of the NBA. That's how I recognized him as growing up. So he was way before my time, so I never got to see him play, obviously. But I always had respect for him because he had this grandpa-like image of the NBA. In my eyes, he was kind of like the godfather figure of the NBA. That's the way I viewed him. So that was my earliest memories of Bill. He was always an old guy for me, and he passed away as an old guy. One of the funny moments I would say for Bill Russell for me when I reflect is his interview with Kevin Garnett way back in 2008. I liked his sense of humor where he teased Kevin Garnett when he said that if you don't get a ring, I'll give you my ring. I thought it was pretty hysterical. I remember Garnett laughing. That interview was a great interview. It was pretty funny. It seemed like it was something out of a Disney movie. I enjoyed it. If you guys haven't seen it, just look it up. Type in Bill Russell, Kevin Garnett. Definitely worth your time watching. Just a very, very great interview. I enjoyed that interview. I still remember it after all these years, and that was way back in 2008. So let's start with the life of Bill Russell. He was born in 1934 in West Monroe, Louisiana. From what I researched, West Monroe is a very small town. It was back then, it still is today. It's about like over 10,000 today. So can you imagine growing up in that area in that small town? So, but Bill didn't live there his whole entire life, but the early memories of that town shaped who he would become. I read an incident that he saw at the age of 8 where his dad drove to an ice house to get ice. He was in the car, and his dad wasn't getting the ice served to him in the car because it was during segregation, and the attendants at that ice house felt the white customers should be served before him. So Bill Russell's dad waited, and then when he thought it was his turn, some other white customers pulled up and they got served before he could get served again. So Bill Russell's father got tired of it and then decided to leave, but then the attendant threatened to kill Bill Russell's dad if he left. So what Bill Russell's father did, his name was Charlie. Charlie got out a tire iron, walked out walked out of the car and just showed the tire iron to the attendant, and then the attendant ran off, and Bill Russell's dad left. So I thought that story was pretty interesting, but that thing can shape you. You know, you experience that at a young age. Another incident that shaped Bill Russell at a young age was his brother Charlie Russell getting in trouble for selling shoes. So his brother had a shoe business at the age of 12, which he shined people's shoes, and the cops came up to him and arrested him simply because he didn't have, quote unquote, a peddler license, even though he wasn't doing anything bad. But according to Bill Russell in a Slam article from a year or two ago, that experience really did shape him because he felt it was just unfair that his brother didn't do anything. So I found that pretty interesting. But it was like through these experiences, Bill built a fearlessness in the sense of not fearing others, that it toughened him up, according to him, where he just didn't even fear dying. So you got to respect that in that regard. He also had to deal with tragedy at a young age, losing his mom at the age of 12. The family did move when he was around 8 to Oakland, I believe. So he spent the rest of his youth living and growing up in the Oakland area. So that's another important milestone in his life. That also shaped him, living in the projects. I remember reading how he got jumped, I believe, by like 3 or 5 kids. I think it was 5 kids it might have been when he was like 10, I believe. I don't know precisely his age, but he was really young. But his mom actually told him that he was going to fight all those kids, and and fight them one by one. And he actually only beat up 2 out of the 3 according to the story. But after that, his mom told him like, well, you stood up for yourself. It doesn't matter if you won or lost, but you know how to feel bad about yourself. And that stuck with Bill his whole entire life and created this fearlessness of him that he wasn't scared of nobody. So that's kind of amazing how that shaped him. And then when you just look at his career, that it took off in high school and then college, he just went to the next level and he was drafted by the Celtics. I'm just gonna skim over that. Just the more interesting stuff comes just when he was playing for the Celtics. Just to me, I felt this was amazing. I remember watching this documentary. NBA TV did it on several years ago, but I remember Bill Russell saying that when he played for the Celtics, that they never sold out despite winning 11 championships with him. The fans did not like him. They had no love for him. I also read in the Slam magazine article in which he wrote that the Boston fans actually called him the N-bomb. They called him a baboon. They told him to go back to Africa. Just that to me is amazing that you were able to play in a city that hated you and the home fans did not love you, but you were still able to play at a high level and win championships, and knowing that you're never going to get the credit for being the best player on that team and just not getting appreciated. Like, I don't know how you have that willpower to continue to perform at a high level and just not want to quit or just not want to give it your all or even force a trade. Just that to me is just, it takes some character. On top of that, I was reading how at one point in time in his career when he played for the Celtics, he was trying to move into a white neighborhood, and he actually did. It was a neighborhood called Reading in Massachusetts. I think the neighborhood was like 20 minutes outside of Boston. So he buys a house. He lives in that neighborhood. It's a white neighborhood, and the neighbors don't want him there. They despise him. They're racist. They actually end up vandalizing his house, spray painting all the walls in his house, and writing the N bomb all over his house on all the walls. And on top of that, they actually shitted on his bed, literally shitted on his bed. Just, I can't imagine just dealing with that. Just, you would think that you would get respect in the city, you win them championships, and they still do this to you. I just don't know how anybody could just be strong enough to deal with that stuff and not be frustrated or not even force a trade. Granted, I guess back then you couldn't force trades, but just to have the discipline to keep going, you got to give him credit. On top of that, just when he was playing, it was during a tumultuous era, the 60s, the civil rights era. And then I was hearing a story about how he stood up for Ali. He did protests in Washington, and that resulted in him getting death threats from just thousands of people. He got hate mail. He had messages, people threatening to kill him. But Bill didn't have any fear of that. So you got to respect that toughness, that to deal with that adversity. Just imagine today's athletes having to deal with 1/10 what Bill had to deal with, and they probably would melt. That's just another thing I respect about that man. Just never backing down to bullies, always standing up to them, and even willing to die for his cause. You had to respect that. Just the toughness. I remember him saying, though, despite all the strength, it took a toll on him. I remember one example he gave in the article was how during the exhibition game in Lexington, Kentucky, I think he was at a restaurant with his teammates and they refused to serve him. So they decided to boycott the game and not play. But it had a toll on his kids, I believe, because when they would boycott games, it would be in some of these southern areas and his kids could not, go stay in a hotel. He had to drive for hours and hours to find a place to stay. But because they were black, it was segregated. So that was tough for him as a father to see his kids go through that pain while he had to keep searching for places to stay while he was on the road if they came with him. Just that to me is awful. I can't imagine just having to go through that frustration and deal with that. Just it's very agonizing, and over a while it can build a toll on you mentally. So you have to respect that man. Just he went through a lot, but he triumphed over all those horrible things. That's one thing I respect about him, that he had very strong character. Just how many people can reflect on their life and just be proud despite all the struggles that they were on the right side of history and they stood up against bullies and they weren't willing to back down. Just that to me is incredible. I don't think many people can say they had that life where they lived it with conviction. On top of that, let's just talk about his NBA career. Just an amazing NBA career. He had 11-time NBA champion. That will never be broken, that record. He has the most rings for any player in NBA history. I don't ever see that happening. I just don't. That to me is an unbreakable record. A record he definitely was proud of because Bill Russell loved to win more so than stats. Another interesting stat I think most people don't know was that he was a 5-time league MVP. Again, very impressive. Only player to win more league MVPs than him was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so you had to give him that. He doesn't have any NBA Finals MVPs, but that's the only reason for that is because it didn't exist when he played. If it did, I'm sure he probably would have like 7 or 8 of them. He probably would have the record for that too. So, but another thing is he was a 12-time All-Star, very impressive. So great NBA career. Obviously, one of the reasons why he's a top 10 player. Some people have him as a GOAT due to all of his success, which, I won't argue against. Just I always felt the GOAT debate is just, very debatable. So yeah, show him some respect for his NBA career. I think people always try to diminish him because of the era he played in, and they always argue he played against YMCA players, but you gotta give the man credit for what he did. And he had a post career after the NBA. I call his post NBA career. He had a run where he was doing broadcasts for CBS, I believe, during the 70s and early 80s. He had some success in doing that, I guess, since he was there for a period of time. He then took over as coach of the Sacramento Kings during one point during the 80s. I think he was the first. Actually, he was the first NBA black head coach, but that's when he took over as the Celtics during the final year of his career, which he won an NBA title. But just another feather in his cap was being able to coach the Kings for a brief period of time. I don't think he was successful in that run. I recall that he didn't succeed, so it didn't work out for him. But, you can't hold that against him. It is what it is. The Kings were a terrible organization back then, and the ironic thing is they still are. So not much he could have really done to be successful on a team that didn't have talent, really. I think the other thing to reflect on Bill is his legacy among just the generations of NBA players that followed him afterwards. Just to me, he's like one of the few living legends that was loved by all the players that came after him. It didn't matter what generation they were from. They could have been a boomer, an Xer, a millennial, and including the current generation Z players. Just the respect he got and reverence spanned all generations, which I thought was pretty cool. To me, he always gave the vibe of the grandpa that you like, the one who would never criticize you but give you gifts. I think that was one thing about Bill Russell that made him liked among players was that he never criticized the younger players, the players coming into the league. He just always wanted to help them. That's what I've heard. He always gave them encouragement and support. And I think that's the way to do it once you're out of the league. You want to be more of a guy to inspire versus criticize and discourage. So I give him that. Just accepting his life after basketball, because I think that's very hard to do for a lot of these players. Their egos are so big. They still want to be part of the game, and it's hard for them to let go, which results in them just bashing the current generation of players. So I give him that to a large degree, just moving past all that stuff. On top of that, it seemed like he was happy after he was officially out of the NBA when he left the Sacramento Kings. He lived in the city of Seattle for many years. It seemed he was pretty happy living there. In the last documentary I saw of him several years ago, I think he lived in Seattle for over 30 some years. So that's great that he enjoyed his final 30 some years of his life. That's awesome that he got to enjoy it after all the struggles he went through, especially during the first half of his life. I think the second half of his life was probably more enjoyable. Just not much conflict during that era. So with that being said, I salute you, Bill Russell, and just rest in peace. And hopefully your legacy lives on and inspires even further generations of NBA players, and even beyond that, just people in general. They could take something from your life and apply it to theirs, which is to have strength and courage when you're dealing with just extreme adversity like he was dealing. So thank you so much, Bill, for everything you did.